Hi, so welcome back. It's Mark from Apprentice 1-to-1 and PowerSonic. You'll see in this video I'm busy working away trying to build up the test board for a couple of interesting experiments I've got in mind that involve some flash bangs and explosions, so stick with it. It gets quite interesting, I think. There is a bit of fireworks action, so it's well worth hanging around. You can see me grafting away here trying to get all of this set up. So I'm basically running line, neutral and earth around these boards. So we've got a 16th edition Mimira board, a wireless fuse wire board and the 18th edition board up there at the top, and I'm trying to arrange it all so we can run current through the protected devices in an order that will give us a chance of seeing which reacts first and then being able to switch it around so we can do the procedure in reverse action. But I'm going to jump onto the video now and we'll talk through exactly what I'm trying to do. Hi, so welcome back. I hope that time lapse made a bit of sense and you could see what I was trying to set up. We've got some older consumer units here. We've got a 16th edition board and an older wireless fuse wire board. And my little idea is to try and see which would operate first out of a B6 MCB and a 5 amp fuse wire. And to do it, we've had to wire this up in a certain configuration to make sure we get that series connection between the protective devices. And you'll see I've got this socket here, which is powered off this board. And this socket here which connects into this board. You'll note that the neutral conductors have gone into the neutral bars rather than through the main switches, and I'll explain why in a minute. It might be easier if I draw this one out to show exactly what I'm trying to do, so I'll do that on the whiteboard in a second and we can explain how the current is flowing when we have it set in a certain way. But I'm going to do an overload, so I'm going to put an electric heater or a kettle or something in and see if we can get one of these to operate before the other, so that's under overload conditions. And I'm then going to do a short circuit fault and see which one goes first. Now obviously with the short circuit one it's a bit of luck, to be fair, as to which would go first with MCBs, because we've still got the B32s up here, and when you get a big enough short circuit, the time curves, they overlap to the point that you're not going to really get any selectivity or discrimination. But fingers crossed this goes before that and we can get some sort of information from it. So yeah, I'm going to draw it all out on the whiteboard now, show you what my plan is, and then we'll pop this all back together so it's nice and safe with everything enclosed, and then we'll do the test, and while I'm doing it I'll explain in which orientation it's all connected. So catch up with you in a sec. Okay, so this is one way we can connect the system up, and I'm going to just talk you through it now. So the neutrals are consistent through the boards. They don't go through any of the main isolator switches, essentially just linked together with cable. Now the line conductor has been arranged in different ways to try and run through the protected devices in series in a different order, if that makes sense. So in this setup we've got the line coming out of the MCB in the top 18th edition board. It then runs down to the bottom 3036 board into its main switch. It will then run through the buzz bar into the fuse. It then pops out of that fuse through the top, and then it runs off to the middle 16th edition board into its main switch, and it will then go through the buzz bar to the MCB, and then out the top of the MCB we connect into this socket here, and we can do that test for the overload with a kettle or whatever I decide to plug in, and also with a short circuit, and see which one operates first in that orientation. Now the other way of doing it is basically the same but different. So if I just remove this wire here, so excuse me while I rub that one away, and if I can find my pen, Lord knows where I've put it, here it is. And essentially with this one we're going to come down to this middle board first. So we'll start with this experiment actually. So we come out the MCB at the top, into the main switch on this middle 16th edition board, through the buzz bar, into the out of the top of the MCB, drop down into the main switch of this 3036 board. It then runs through that buzz bar and then out of the 5 amp fuse wire into this socket on the bottom board. So we run through the MCB first in this setup, then the 5 amp fuse, and then away, just to see if it makes any difference to the order the protective devices are in. Electrons behave in very strange ways, and the science behind it all still isn't fully understood. So rather than just assuming, I thought we'd throw this into the experiment as well. I'm going to jump to the video now and we'll get it set up in this orientation first, and we'll see what happens under overload and under short circuit. So I'll jump back on the video in a second. Okay, so we've got it all set up now, and you'll see the lids are on, safe as pos. Brought a kettle over so we can have a bit of overload. 5 amp fuse wires in there, and in this board we've got the B6. It's on there. I'll leave that up so we can, it doesn't really matter about seeing that, I suppose, but just to prove that socket's got no power on it, and the power is coming out this one down here. We're all good. So yeah, let's see if this does anything. And there we go. Now we had a bit of a flash underneath there, bit of excitement, and the MCB still in the on position. Kettle didn't get very far, you know, that was within a second or so, and the fuse wire has gone first. It was nice to see that none of this lot went, and obviously with an overload you get that climb through the time curve, and if we look in the regs you'll see the difference between the operation of a fuse wire and a B6 MCB. So yeah, that was the first stage of the test done, and the MCB held and the fuse wire went, and that's with the line going through into the MCB first, out of the MCB into the main switch on here, through the bus bar, through this fuse wire, and then out into this socket. And we're going to leave that in the same setup, and we're going to do a short circuit experiment now to see if there's any difference when you've got an instantaneous high current fault. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so I've replaced the fuse wire now in here, and you can see the power's been restored. No power on this one, set up in exactly the same way, and I'm now going to do an instantaneous short circuit, and I've just used this little adapter here and a lead to let the fault current flow through and see which one operates first. Now I've left that open this time just in case it is that one, and we might see the flash, and I'll just hold this in that position. So let me switch that on and we'll see what happens. There you go, that went with quite a bang, and you would have seen that the flash there, noticed that I wasn't looking at it, and that's why, as I spoke about on the prior video, these covers were so important, and I've left this off just so you could see what was going to happen there. And essentially, when that's in place, any molten metal that might explode in the course of the fuse wire going, because you imagine that's just a 5 amp fuse wire, you imagine a 30 amp fuse wire for example, they do go with quite a pop. You do get a big old flash, and bits of melting metal fly off in all directions. So if they're not covered over, it is a possibility. So that's what one of the things this was for. You see there, it just would screw in, and then obviously if anyone's coming to work on it, they're supposed to turn the main switch off. You can then remove this, and away you go, changing your fuse wires. So just to cover that, and again, actually point this out, have a close-up look at this old fuse wire board. So it's from Wilex, and one of the things that I want to make clear, it's something that somebody mentioned in the comments on another video actually, and that's that if you insert this supposed 5 amp fuse wire holder, which is what it says on there, into the 5 amp fuse carrier, it goes in just fine. And if I was to move this along and insert it into the 15 amp carrier and then the 30 amp carrier, that goes in no problem at all, and the connection's quite solid. But if you actually look at these, if I get them side on, so that's the difference between the 30 amp carrier and the 5 amp carrier. I don't know if that's coming across on camera, but they're much wider for the 30 amp carrier, the pins. So if you were to try and insert the 30 amp carrier in here, it's not going to go in, and it's not going to go in there either. It just fits in to that carrier. And I don't know, actually yes, I do have a 15 amp one, so we can demonstrate it with that as well. So if we pop them down here and work up through the sizes, hopefully you can see how they're getting progressively larger. And again, the 15 amp carrier doesn't go into the, put it in the right place, in the 5 amp one, but it will go in the 30 and it will go in the 15. Now the thinking of that was to stop people putting overrated fuse wire into the incorrect carriers and potentially causing an issue with overloading of the current carrying capacity of the smaller CSA cables. But of course, it doesn't stop somebody from fitting the incorrect fuse wire in the carrier itself. And you know, that was often a thing that would happen. Somebody would pop a too large fuse carrying wire through the actual ceramic fuse carrier itself. And yeah, but it's there, isn't it? Because sometimes if you're in a pinch and the lights have gone off but you're not using the immersion heater or whatever, you can see people would maybe pull that out and drop it in. But I just thought I'd make that point while we're looking at this video. Let's crack on with the rest of it. I'm going to pop it back together now. I'm going to swap the wiring around, so we're then going to run through, let me get this right, we're going to run through this board first. So we're going to bring the line down into this board. It's going to go through the main switch, out through the fuse. It's then going to link back through into this main switch, along the bus bar, out through the MCB and out of this socket. So we're kind of reversing the flow through the protective devices to see if it makes any difference. But during this particular experiment, the fuse wire went first in both instances. So I'll get on with setting that up now. Okay, so you'll see here we've got it all set up. I've took myself out of shot and zoomed in on this because I've got a strong suspicion it'll be the old fuse wire again. But if we drop the power on, you see here we've got power at this socket, nothing at this one. So now the power is running through here, down to this board, through the main switch, through the fuse, back up into the main switch of this one, and then along the bus bar, and out the MCB to the socket. So if we plug the kettle in again, make sure it's not calling for any power. And I will avert my eyes while we do this again. We'll just pop the kettle on. And you hear a small tick. I don't know if that picked that up on camera or not, but the fuse wire is operated again. The MCB is still up. So we can pop that out, turn that off, pop the pre-prepared fuse wire in just to help with continuity on the old video, and turn that off. And we'll replicate the short circuit again. This one should go with a bit more of a bang and a flash. So I'll avert my eyes and try and make sure I'm out of shot so you guys can see it. Right, I hope you enjoyed that little demonstration. It's quite clear from what we've seen that the fuse wire operates the quickest. It's really not that scientific, I appreciate, but I used fresh fuse wire, it wasn't old manky stuff, and just did a little experiment of my own to see what would happen. We'll have a little jump into the regs books and see if we can see why it's happened like that. None of the upfront protective devices operated in any of it. Obviously we was going line to neutral faults, so the RCDs weren't too upset. The fuse in the plug top that's on all of this didn't blow, so we did have some selectivity there with it, and that's why I did the demonstration with the 5 and the 6 amp. Any higher than that and we're going to start having issues further back in the installation. I won't really be able to demo anything. So yeah, that was the kind of purpose of it. I've got this little, this is what I keep my fuse wire in. I found that on a job years and years ago when we took a board out and just kept it. Don't know why really, but I've had that a long time. One thing to mention on these Mamera 2000 boards, this RCD often catch people out. So when it had operated due to an earth leakage fault, it'd sit in the middle, and if you just tried to push it back up, it wouldn't restore power. I had so many call outs over the years because of that. But it's quite a simple one where you drop it, you have to push it all the way into the open position, off, and then reset it, and it would restore power. So just want to watch out for if you come across any of these boards out on site and you're trying to get it back on, you know, you have to fully flick it down first. But yeah, this is basically a little selection of consumer units. I thought it might be quite interesting just to have a play around and see. And we can do a few other experiments as well as time moves along. But we've got this 18th edition board up here, and with its surge protector RCDs and all of the rest of it. We've now got a 16th edition board down here that we can play about with and maybe do some testing of the different trip times between this RCD and these ones. This is all functioning stuff, although this is obviously old and well used. It's still working, so we can do some testing on there. And then the old fuse wires, so another little old board to play around with and mess about with. See if we can do some more interesting experiments. If anyone's got anything they'd like to see, let me know, and we'll get something together. I'm going to jump into the regs books now, see if I can find out any of the background knowledge behind all of this to kind of explain what I've demonstrated. And yeah, we'll pick up in the video in a minute. I'm going to go and plug this into a reliable source of electricity so I can finally get this cup of tea and coffee I've been trying to get. And yeah, I'll jump back on the video in a second. Okay, so let's have a little dive into the regs book, and this is page 365, and it's the time current curve for BS 3036 semi-enclosed fuses. And if you look in this table up here, it's showing a fuse rating of 5 amps, and it's saying that to get a trip within 0.1 seconds would elect 45 amps. That's the maximum operating time to current characteristics. And if you look right at the end, it's saying 5 seconds for 13 amps. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? It's saying it will allow that 13 amps to flow for 5 seconds. And if you look in this graph itself, so if we go up to the top, and you can see here, this is the 5 amp line. So right up at the top, all the way up here, it's saying 10,000 seconds, and it will allow that to flow. If you follow this down the chart, roughly speaking, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then go all the way up, you can see that's clear. So it's not till you get around 9 amps, it will hold that for quite some time, if you look at that there. So it will allow a flow of current beyond its rating for a sustained period. And that's something, if we reference back to a video Craig O'Neill's done very recently, he explains that in a better way than me, why it's important to select your cable's current carrying capacity with more than just the protective device in mind. So sometimes you need a bit of thought in there, because they will allow current to flow for a period of time beyond their operating value. So again, if we look on this curve here, you can see here we've got 10 amps, and this is RMS, so it's 20, 30. So if we go up the line here for 30 amps, we'll say roughly 0.2 seconds. And if we look on there, it's saying 32 amps for 0.2 seconds. Now the reason I'm referencing that, because we're going to go and look at the B-type breaker in a minute. So that's showing there 0.2. So under a dead short, to get that instantaneous operation, we look along this line here again, 20, 30, 40, 45 amps, it reckons. So that's where it starts to react instantly, give or take. Now if we just jump over a few pages, see if I can find the right page. So that's up here, and we've now got the type B circuit breakers, so 60898s, and their operating times here. Now this graph's a little bit different, but we can interpret it in the same kind of way. So you've got the time current characteristics for a type B circuit breaker, and the overcurrent characteristics for RCBOs as well. But if we look on here at a B6, and that's saying for a current for time of 0.1 seconds, you need that 30 amps current flow. So here, if we look again, so this is the 6 amp line, and again you've got your 10,000 seconds at the top. So if you scroll down to the bottom, so you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you're kind of around 8 towards 9 amps, where it'll allow for quite a period of time that current to flow before it operates. Now if we scroll along a little bit further, so we're now into 10, so if we say we go for 15, and if we go up this time curve here, we can see here it's going to stand that 15 for quite a period. So we're way beyond 10 seconds. So with the kettle in our example, we can see why the fuse wire's gone first, because its curve was a little bit different. So we'll have a look back at that page again in a minute just to explain that. But that's roughly where we are. You know, we're getting on probably for 70 or 80 amps here. 70 or 80 seconds before it would operate. And again, with the instantaneous current, you're at about 30 amps. So really, there is an argument that with that short circuit in place, the MCB might have reacted first, looking at the curve, but we know that isn't what happened. And that's the nature of how fuse wires operate, to be totally honest. There's no build-up of heat. So with an MCB, we've got to heat that heat the strip inside before we get that reaction. Whereas a fuse wire, is just going to vaporize and essentially explode. So you can see, you know, from the basic physics of it, why a fuse wire would on a short circuit, because we'd be way beyond just 30 amps when we're shorting out line to neutral, way beyond it. So it's just a race between which can blow itself to pieces first or overheat first. And in the case of the fuse wire, you know, we could have had something of the order of maybe 60-70 amps for a very short period. And that's why I said about selectivity with the other devices set up on that board. And I was confident before we did the experiment that the fuse wire would go first, but it was interesting to see that that's exactly what happened. So if we jump back again to the fuse wire one, and we'll just have a little scroll up again based on the 13 amps. So if we find that again, so roughly here, if we scroll up this curve, you'll see here we're just over a second. So you can see exactly why that would go before the MCB under an overload. So it reacts much quicker. So I hope that explains some of the reasoning behind what we've just demonstrated on the board. You can see quite clearly that for an overcurrent, that the fuse wire should indeed blow itself first, and it did. And then for a direct short circuit current, they're both beyond their instantaneous trip-in values. It is just a race of how the devices actually work themselves, and other people have done videos on that already, and I'll reference a link to Craig's somewhere in this one, and you can go off and watch that because he can explain it far better than I can. But I thought it was a nice little experiment for us to do, and around. So I need to get on with trying to edit that together now into something that might make sense. Again, I'm not an expert or a teacher, it's just me being playing around in a safe and controlled environment. There's been someone in here with me while I've done all of this, and yeah, it's all been enclosed and contained while we've essentially put faults onto the system to see what would trip first. And again, not so much a fault with the kettle, it's a scenario that could present if a piece of equipment goes faulty within a lighting circuit, for example. You know, these things with all the electronics we're installing now, it can happen where you can have that over voltage that's not presented as an immediate fault. So that was an interesting one to see, where the fuse wire will actually pick those things up first. So that's the good old traditional fuse wire. So sometimes we often assume that these modern protective devices are much better than what we had in the past, but we can see there that when you're looking for overcurrent, short circuit, that the fuse wire actually operated more quickly than the MCB. Now if we're going to throw in things like AFDDs and such, obviously there's other benefits there as well, and perhaps we can build this test board up to include some AFDDs. And equally with MCBs especially, whilst the trip wasn't as quick as the fuse wire, it still would be very quick under an immediate fault. It was just a race to react first. And also, you know, they're a lot easier to reset, aren't they? So I've had to faff around putting fuse wire in. It's a right fiddly performance, especially when you've got big fat hands like I have. And, you know, having somebody in the dark under the stairs trying to do all of that and then use the actual board in a way that's safe. So you see, I explained you have to turn the main switch off before you do any maintenance on it. Are people actually going to do that? Are they going to install the right fuse wire after they've done the work? So it takes all of that user interference away, and they've simply got to reset a breaker. So there's that to factor in as well. And yeah, just interested in other people's comments. If you want to drop them down below, you want to go into further detail and explain some of the things that I've demonstrated and some of the reasoning that you might believe in. Again, I'm not an expert. This is just me using my experience and knowledge and the reference into the regulations and my test board to try and come up with stuff that might be interesting. And I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It makes a huge difference to being able to keep doing this channel. Yeah, so thank you very much to everyone who has subscribed recently. I appreciate all the support, and I will catch you on the next one.